In the year of our Lord 1396, beneath the cold stones of Westminster, a girl is crowned queen. Not a woman, not a bride in truth. A girl, 6 winters old, her breath still sweet with milk and bedtime stories. She cannot write her own name, but she now bears a crown heavier than kingdoms. They say it is a marriage, they call it peace. But you, a priest, ancient and bent from years of kneeling, know better. This is no wedding, it is the burial of a childhood. She walks beside him, her tiny hand lost in the leather-gloved grasp of a man nearly 5 times her age, King Richard II, golden-haired and hollow-eyed. His smile is kind, but behind it, the storm of a nation trembles. He needs her, not for love, not for lust, but for what her body represents, an end to a war that has drowned 2 nations in generations of blood. She wears a gown sewn with gold, pearls braided in her hair. The jewels pull at her scalp. She does not cry. She looks up at the vaulted arches and candlelight as if staring into heaven itself, unafraid. The people whisper, she is brave, she is obedient, she is beautiful. But what she is a weapon wrapped in velvet. What she is a hostage dressed as royalty. And as your lips utter the sacred vows, your hands tremble. Because you too were once a child, and you see it now, how power feeds on innocence, how empires carve treaties from the bones of little girls. The congregation rises in joy, trumpets sound, but in your heart, a single thought tolls like a funeral bell. She will survive, but she will never be free. Part 1. The Bride of Glass. She is 6, not in some metaphorical sense, not innocent like a child, not delicate like spring. No, she is truly 6. She cannot yet tie her own bodice. She stumbles over her French lessons. She still believes in angels. And yet today, Isabella of Valois will be handed across the sea to a man old enough to be her father, to a crown, to a war, to a future already written in ink and iron. In the Louvre, her mother adjusts the hem of her daughter's wedding gown. The fabric is stiff with embroidery, gold threads, lilies of France, the flint-edged pride of a kingdom exhausted by war. The little girl blinks up at her mother. She does not ask questions. She has learned that silence is safer. She has heard the screams when her father forgets his name, forgets her, forgets the difference between flesh and glass. King Charles VI, her father, her shadow, her curse, walks the palace at night whispering to the walls. He believes himself fragile, transparent. He refuses to be touched. He fears he will shatter. And so Isabella learns not to run, not to fall, not to breathe too loud. She learns diplomacy long before she learns arithmetic. The journey across the channel is cold, rough, and long. She vomits over the side of the ship. No one comforts her. Because she is not a child, she is a treaty wrapped in silk. When they reach Calais, English territory on French soil, she is led ashore under banners of red and gold. The men bow to her, but not because they love her. They bow because she carries the weight of 800,000 francs on her back, and the fragile hope of a 28-year truce. Then she sees him, Richard, King of England, 29 years old, grief still fresh in his eyes from the death of Anne of Bohemia. He had loved Anne, truly. His first queen had been his companion, his comfort, his North Star. And now he is to wed a girl who cannot yet write her own name. But he does not recoil. He kneels, takes her tiny hand, and says gently, "Do you know who I am?" She nods. She has practiced this moment 100 times in her mind. But now her lips move without sound. He smiles, a real smile, not a political one. And for a moment, something in him softens. Not desire, not power, but a strange tenderness. He is a man who has lost everything. She is a girl who owns nothing. Between them, a strange kinship blooms. A fragile understanding, wordless but profound. In Calais Castle, the wedding is held. Small, sacred, surreal. She says nothing, but she watches everything. The bishops' rings, the lords with their narrowed eyes, the scribes who write faster than lightning, recording every flicker of history. She is not frightened. She is watching. And that is what terrifies them most. At the moment of the vows, Richard lowers himself again. He whispers, "I do not ask you to love me, only to live. You will have tutors, gardens, music, books. I will give you everything that can be given. But this war must end. She nods, not because she understands, but because that's what is expected of her. The ring slides onto her finger, the bells toll. And in that instant, somewhere between God and politics, a child becomes a queen. Not by age, not by wisdom, but by sacrifice. And as she walks into Westminster, hand in hand with a man the world calls king, they do not see a little girl. They see a banner of peace, a pawn, a promise. But inside she feels the glass around her life forming, clear, sharp, and cold. And she wonders, how long before I break? Part 2, A Crown in Chains. The palace begins to whisper. At first, it is only in corners, behind silks, beneath breath. But she hears it, always. Children who live among the wolves learn to listen. She is 9 now, taller, sharper, still silent, but no longer innocent. Richard comes to see her less. He does not bring her birds anymore. His hands tremble sometimes. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. One afternoon, she asks her lady-in-waiting, "Why is His Grace always looking out the window?" The woman does not answer. Because what would she say? That her husband, her king, is waiting for ships that will never come. That rebellion is blooming like mold in the bones of England. The whispers become soldiers. The shadows become swords. Then one night, her chamber doors are flung open. Margaret Holland, her dearest companion, stumbles in, breathless, pale. We must go now. Isabella clutches only her rosary and her doll. She leaves behind her books, her music box, the pressed violets Richard gave her on her 7th name day. In the dead of night, they ride. No procession, no crowds, no banners, only guards in armor that smells of fear. They take her to the tower, not the palace, the prison. When the doors close behind her, the stone seems to breathe. She is not told why. She is not told how long. But she is told one thing: "For your safety, Your Grace." And yet the windows are barred. The guards do not smile. The candles are always lit, not to guide her, but to watch her. 2 days pass. Then he comes. Richard. But not the Richard she knew. His beard is unkempt, his robe stained, his voice broken glass over gravel. He kneels again, like the first day. But now he does not look at her. He looks through her. "They have come for my crown," he whispers, "and I may not be able to protect you." Isabella, no longer just a child, asks, "Are you still the king?" Silence. And in that silence, she understands the truth. Richard tells her of his cousin, Henry, of betrayal, of ambition, of how loyalty, once cracked, shatters everything. "You must be brave, ma petite," he says. "You are no longer just my queen. You are a symbol. They will try to use you. Do not let them." The next time the doors open, they bring a new king. Henry of Bolingbroke, Henry IV. He studies her like a hawk might study a dove. Curious, calculating. She curtsies perfectly. He nods, cold approval. "I regret our meeting under such circumstances," he says. She does not answer. "Your father may want you back, or he may not. That depends on your behavior, on your value. Value. Not innocence, not grace, value." And so begins her new life, not as a queen, not as a child, but as a hostage wearing a crown. She is not locked in a cell. No, she walks the gardens, reads books, smiles in court when asked. But she knows. The tower is no longer a building, it is inside her now. She has become fluent in silence, a master of manner, a diplomat in miniature. She does not cry when she hears of Richard's death. She waits until nightfall. Then she kneels beside her bed, and for the first time she speaks not to God, but to the dead. "I was your queen. I am still your queen, and they will not make me disappear." Outside her chambers, men argue over treaties, over dowries, over the cost of feeding her retinue. They think she is asleep, but Isabella is not sleeping. She is learning how power works, how memory is shaped, how a name, if held tightly enough, becomes a weapon. By spring, an ultimatum comes. Return to France, if you renounce your crown. She is 10 years old, and they are asking her to undo history, to say that her marriage, her coronation, her years in England were nothing. She hesitates, not because she fears exile, but because in her chest there is still a voice whispering, "You were a queen, you are a queen, you were real." But then word arrives from Paris, from her father, lucid, brief, unyielding. "Come home, now." And like that, her fate is sealed. The girl who had been made Queen of England is placed on a ship, no longer robed in gold, no longer surrounded by servants. Just her, the sea and the wind, tearing through the remnants of a kingdom she once called home. She does not cry, but as England fades behind her, she does not look back. Part 3. The girl who returned as stone. Paris does not recognize her. The city that once smelled of lavender and iron now reeks of rot and ambition. The court is louder than she remembers, louder and colder. And she is no longer the child they sent away. She has returned with silence, sharpened like a blade. Isabella is 11, but her eyes are ancient. They call her La Petite Reine, the little queen, but never to her face. To her face they smile too wide, bow too low, speak too carefully. She understands. She has lived among courtiers. She knows the game. But here in France, the board is warped. Her father forgets her name on bad days. Her mother sees her not as a daughter, but as a symbol. Damaged goods wrapped in silk, still useful, still tradable. Isabeau of Bavaria, her mother, does not ask about her time in England. She asks what Henry IV eats for supper, how the guards change shift, which dukes speak against each other. Isabella answers nothing, but says everything. She wears her grief like a veil, delicate, translucent, and impossible to remove. They offer suitors, German counts, Italian dukes, a Portuguese prince with a lazy eye. They whisper of remarrying her to some cousin of the French crown. But she refuses, politely of course. She smiles as she does it. They think her meek, but in truth, she is choosing herself for the first time. Then Charles, Duke of Orléans, poet, general, politician. Her cousin, a man who wears his pain like armor and his dreams like weapons. He speaks to her not as a child, not as a queen, but as a person. "I don't want the widow of Richard," he says. "I want Isabella, the one who returned with her spine unbroken." She does not answer right away. She watches him, studies him. He does not flinch under her gaze. It is not love at first sight. It is something stranger. Recognition. Two ghosts, two survivors of crowns and cages. The wedding is grand. Not like the first, not cold and calculated. This time the bells ring for her. This time she walks on her own feet. No one drags her down the aisle. No one places a crown upon her without asking. She wears deep blue, the color of midnight. Her eyes do not lower. When they ask, "Do you take this man?" she answers before they finish the sentence. At the feast, troubadours sing ballads, not of war, not of conquest, but of resilience. She sits beside Charles and speaks freely, laughs softly, touches his hand not out of duty, but because she wants to. For the first time, Isabella is not a transaction. She is not a hostage. She is not a child soldier in a war of kings. She is home. They give her a palace. She turns it into a sanctuary, a haven for poets, scholars, musicians, and lost girls like she once was. She reads by candlelight. She writes letters to queens across Europe. She signs them not as Widow of England, but as Duchess of Orléans. In 1407, her daughter is born, Jeanne. She holds the infant against her chest and weeps, not from pain, not from fear, but from the impossible miracle of it all. "You will not be a pawn," she whispers in both French and English. "I will not let them take your name the way they took mine." She nurses the child herself, scandalizing the court. She sings lullabies Richard once hummed to her when the nights in Westminster turned cold. Each note is a prayer. Each breath is a reclamation. But shadows stir in France. Her father-in-law, Louis of Orléans, is murdered. Blood on cobblestones, an ambush in the street, broad daylight, no mercy. The Duke of Burgundy sends assassins, not letters. War is coming, and the palace once filled with poetry now echoes with the sound of steel being sharpened. Isabella does not run. She becomes something else. Not a girl, not a queen, not a duchess, but a blade hidden in velvet. Part 4. A wife among wars. War has a smell. Not just blood, but fear soaked into fabric, burned parchment, spoiled meat. The kind of silence that screams behind stone walls. This is the scent that now clings to the halls of Blois. Once a sanctuary, now a fortress. Isabella no longer walks the gardens at night. She meets with envoys instead. Men who speak in riddles and veiled threats, men who sip wine and whisper death. Charles, her husband, her anchor, is no longer just a poet. He is a soldier now, a general, a man with maps drawn in blood. He leaves often, rides into a kingdom tearing itself apart. Each time he does, she stands at the gates, watches him vanish into fog, and prays with clenched teeth, not for victory, but for return. 1408. She bears her second child, a son, Charles, named for his father. Born beneath low grey skies, to the sound of bells tolling not for celebration, but for preparation. The labor nearly kills her. Blood pools beneath her body. The midwives panic. She floats between worlds. In that blurred space between breath and nothing, she sees Richard. He says nothing, only looks at her with that same soft, distant gaze. And then she wakes. The recovery is long. The physicians say she must never bear another child. It will break you, they warn. It almost did. And so love, once fiery, once instinctive, becomes careful. A dance of restraint, a touch with consequences. She grieves this, not for the loss of desire, but for the fear that now lives in her bed. Charles understands. They speak more, touch less. But the bond between them grows tighter, rooted in more than flesh, in trust, in memory, in knowing. While he rides to war, she governs. She drafts letters, meets with counselors, signs edicts. She feeds the people when the grain fails. She arranges safe passage for refugees fleeing Burgundian raids. She orders the building of shelters, the digging of wells, the repair of broken roofs. They call her the Quiet Lioness, because she does not shout. But when she speaks, armies pause. In her private chamber, she writes letters to England, not to the court, but to those who remember her. A tutor, a maid, a forgotten knight. She does not ask for allegiance. She asks only, "What do your people need?" Because she has not forgotten them. The ones who bowed to her, not because they had to, but because they believed. Her body lives in France, but part of her spirit still walks the corridors of Westminster. 14. Another daughter, Marguerite. Another brush with death. This time the fever clings. She survives, but never fully recovers. Her strength fades, her breath shortens. There are days when she cannot rise, when her children's laughter becomes a distant bell. But she refuses to disappear. Wrapped in blankets, propped on cushions, she continues to rule. "I am not dying," she tells her physician. "I am working from bed." Charles returns from battle weary, blood-stained, triumphant. He kneels beside her, places her hand over his heart. "You kept us alive," he says. She smiles faintly. That is what women do. They sit together in the evenings now, reading, planning, dreaming of peace. She tells him of her vision, a court of art, of learning, of justice, untouched by swords. He tells her he dreams of nothing more. But both know the truth. Peace is not gifted, it is built, and they are still laying bricks in a storm. Outside, Burgundy sharpens its knives. Inside, Isabella sharpens her mind. She studies war not through steel, but through consequence. What burned villages breed, what famine ignites, what vengeance leaves behind. She becomes more than duchess. She becomes memory and mirror and map. A woman too sick to bear arms, but too dangerous to silence. And in the quiet of her study, by flickering candlelight, she begins to write something else. Not a letter, not a command, but a book. On the weight of crowns. A record, a warning, a testament. Because Isabella knows. Empires forget, kings die, but truth, when written by a woman who refused to break, can outlive them all. Part 5. The light fades but never dies. The breath comes slower now. Each morning, Isabella wakes with the taste of iron in her mouth. Each evening, her lungs rasp like parchment being torn. She no longer walks the gardens. The world comes to her now. Ministers, messengers, physicians, poets. She speaks less, but when she does, the words carry weight, not like stone, like scripture. It is 1410. France is unraveling. The Duke of Burgundy whispers with the English. Old enemies realign. New knives glint in familiar hands. But Isabella watches without panic, because she has seen this before. She knows that power is not a sword, but a current. And she, even now, is part of the river that shapes the banks. In the silence of her bedchamber, she dictates messages. One to her son, Charles. Do not be the loudest voice in the room. Be the one they realize they were already listening to. One to her daughter, Jeanne. Make your name mean something before they turn it into a crown. One to her husband. Do not bury yourself beside me before your time. She writes one more letter, unsent, unsealed, addressed simply to England. I do not hate you, she writes. I remember your reign, your bells, your children's laughter. You gave me books, you gave me music, you gave me grief. And in that grief I found my strength. I was your queen, not in name, but in witness. She folds it gently, places it beneath her pillow. Charles sits beside her nightly now, reads her poems she once memorized at 12. His voice cracks, she smiles. I do not fear death, she whispers, only being forgotten. He shakes his head. They will remember, not the wedding, not the war, but the woman who walked through both. September 13, 1410. A candle burns low beside her, the children sleep nearby. She asks for one final thing. Open the window, let me hear the world. And so they do. She listens, not to wind, not to bells, but to life. The sound of hooves, the murmur of prayer, a child laughing in the courtyard below. And then she exhales. Once, only once, and is gone. France mourns. Paris wears black. Across Europe letters are sent. The Duchess of Orléans is dead. But in halls and hearths far from court, people say something different. The little queen has passed, the one who never bowed, the one who remembered the forgotten. Charles buries her at the convent of the Celestines, not with marble, but with words. On her stone he has etched a single line, in both French and English. She was never just a wife. Her children grow. Jeanne becomes a patron of poets, Charles a protector of cities, Marguerite a founder of schools. Each of them, in quiet ways, carries forward her fire. The war rages on, but in the lull between battles, in libraries and letters and lullabies, her name returns, not as a crown, but as a kind of prayer. Isabella of Valois, child bride, queen without power, mother of peace, architect of endurance. She was born into a game where she was only meant to be moved. Instead, she learned how to move others, not with force, but with unbroken grace. And though her light faded, it never died. It flickers still, in the quiet, in the written word, in the voice of any girl told she is too small to shape the world.